Okay, in this unit, we're going to be focusing on what are the basic characteristics of an animal. What makes an animal an animal? So let's go ahead and get started with this. We know that all animals are going to be eukaryotic. They're also going to be multicellular. There are no single-celled animals. Um, they're all going to be heterotrophic, so they obtain their nutrients through ingestion. Okay. They are also going to be diploid, which means every animal has two sets of each chromosome, one from one parent and one from the other parent. They are mobile. They're not sessile. Sessile are going to be our plants. Okay. Now, there are going to be examples of organisms or of animals that we look at later that maybe during their adult life they might be sessile, but some part of their life cycle they are going to be considered mobile. They are made of tissues. Those tissues could be advanced into organs, but you do have cells that group into tissues with animals. There are no cell walls in animals, and they do sexually reproduce. Okay, they produce gametes, those sex cells, and then they can fuse together through fertilization to form a zygote. So these are the basic characteristics that all animals share. Let's look at some plain body symmetry now. Okay, body symmetry is just how is that animal organized? How does it look? How is it built? Um, One type of body symmetry would be considered asymmetrical, or it has an irregular body shape. Some examples of this would be your simplest animals, like your sponges. They're going to be asymmetrical. They don't have a pattern to their body shape. Another type of symmetry would be radial symmetry. Okay, in radial symmetry, you have body parts that are aligned along a central axis. And if you look at the picture over here on the right, you can see this central axis, and you can see that their body parts coordinate along a central axis. Okay, you have bilateral symmetry, which is going to be what we are more familiar with body symmetry, and it's where there's a left side and a right side, or two halves of the body that can be split apart. And most times when you split that body symmetry apart, both of those halves are identical for the most part. Like some of our more complex animals, humans for example, would have bilateral symmetry. You can split us down the middle, and our left side and our right side would be two separate halves, but they would be almost identical halves. Now, in bilateral symmetry, you have something called cephalization in some of our more complex animals as well. So this happens just with bilateral symmetrical animals. The cephalization process is where you have sensory organs that are going to be located in the anterior part or anterior region of the animal. Okay, and that only is going to occur with your bilateral symmetrical animals. So those sense organs like smell and sight and touch, okay, or smell and sight and taste, excuse me, would be found in this particular type of body symmetry. Going over just scientific positioning of an organism, the anterior part of the organism is going to be its head region. The posterior would be the tail or the rear region. Okay, the ventral is going to be the underside, the belly region, and then the dorsal would be the back. As far as scientific terms labeling the parts of an animal. So make sure that you're good with where these different parts are located and what we call them. So anterior would be the head or the front, the posterior would be the tail or the back or the rear, the dorsal would be the back, okay, the spine area, and then the ventral would be the belly. Okay, let's get into some animal classification. Like I said, this is pretty much just straightforward information that we're looking at. This nice little cladogram is going to show us how our animals relate as far as our um, invertebrates are going to fall into place. So our animals that are invertebrates, how their cladogram is going to be represented. So let's look at some of the phyla of some of our basic animals. You have the Porifera, which are the sponges. You have the Cnidarians, which are the jellies. You have the Platyhelminthes, which are the flatworms, and these are all phylum, okay, the phyla that they belong to. You have the mollusks, or the mollusca, which would be your clams and snails, squid and octopi fall into that category. You have your annelids. Your annelids would be your segmented worms, like an earthworm. You have your nematodes, which are going to be your roundworms. And then you have your arthropods, your arthropoda. These are going to be your insects, your crabs, your spiders. And then you have your echinoderms, which is where your sea stars are going to fall as far as the phylum they belong in. All right, so that was a brief look at the phylum of each invertebrate, in which what is the name of their phylum and the types of invertebrates that belong in those phylum. Body cavities. Let's look at this. Okay, we're talking about bilateral animals and their body cavities. They can be broken down in one of these three body plans. You can have acollomates, which don't have a body cavity. You can have pseudocollomates, which have a body cavity between the mesoderm and endoderm, and these are layers during cell division. Okay, so you have your mesoderm layer in this picture. You have your endoderm in this picture, and then there's a body cavity that is found there. And then you have your collomates, which have a true cavity within the mesoderm. Okay, these are just body cavities, and we're going to talk about why or how those are important as we go along. Respiration for our basic animals. Okay, yes, they need oxygen. Yes, they're going to release carbon dioxide through respiration. Your simple animals exchange it directly with the environment using diffusion. Okay, so your worms, okay, your annelids and your platyhelminthes, okay, those would be through diffusion, okay, exchange of gases. Your jellies, exchange of gases. Your sponges, exchange of gases, okay. Those are examples of simple animals. Your more complex animals will have a type of respiratory system or respiratory structures that they use to exchange gases, intake of oxygen, and the release of carbon dioxide. Gills, okay, for some of your aquatic complex animals, and then lungs for your terrestrial complex animals. Now, the way gills work, which in the way lungs work, we'll get into these later, but there will be blood flow that picks up oxygen and transports it. So as we look at fish a little in another unit, and as we look at terrestrial animals in another unit, we'll get into detail about how gills versus lungs work. Okay, circulatory systems of our animals. You can have either an open circulatory system or a closed circulatory system. In an open circulatory system, what's going to happen is the heart's going to pump fluid that contains oxygen and nutrients through vessels into a body cavity. And as this happens, this fluid washes over tissues, and then oxygen is going to diffuse from that fluid into the tissue that needs the oxygen. That's an open circulatory system. More of your simple animals will have that type of circulatory system. Your closed circulatory system, which is where the heart pumps blood, okay, through a system of vessels, and then that blood doesn't come in contact with the actual tissue. However, the veins or the vessels are going to allow for that passage. Okay, we, for example, humans, we have a closed circulatory system. Blood doesn't just flow freely over our organs inside our body. Um, it flows through vessels and veins and allows for transport, and that way, where the open circulatory system, it does flow freely. And then here's just a couple of pictures so you can see examples. Alright, support for an animal. There are two types of skeletal supports. There's one that's going to be considered an exoskeleton and one that's an endoskeleton. Exo meaning outside, endo meaning inside. So an exoskeleton will be a skeleton that is on the outside of the animal, kind of like a shell. And then the endoskeleton obviously will be like our skeleton, an animal that has some type of skeletal structure, soft or hard, found on the inside of the organism. Now, reproductive strategies. Sexual reproduction is going to be the reproductive processes that all animals go through. Gametes will be produced, male and female gametes. There can be certain types of animals, some simple animals that could be considered hermaphrodites, where they have both, one organism will have both testes and ovaries. Now, external fertilization. There are some of our simple animals especially, that are going to use external fertilization, not internal fertilization. And then external fertilization, both the male and female gametes will be released, okay, close to each other. And this usually happens in aquatic environments, so it's going to be mainly your aquatic animals that are going to use external fertilization. The sperm are released in the water, the egg are released in the water near each other, and then you have the fertilization between the sperm and egg to form the zygote, but it is usually going to be in an external environment. Sponges, corals, your fish, okay, those are some examples of animals that would have external fertilization. Most of your land or terrestrial animals will use internal fertilization. Okay, sperm and egg inside the female's body forms the zygote and grows to an organism, and that is still protected by the female's body. Those are some basic characteristics of your animals.